All right, and we are back with chapter 4, and this is going to be the start of a really big chapter. So chapter 4 is where we create the hand-painted character. So first things first, we're going to be starting with the sculpt of the body, and this is going to be what we aim to achieve. So that's what we'll be working towards. This is the hand-painted version, the final version. And we are going to be, I'll show you how to create this whole thing. So everything on my end took about 33 to 34 hours. And, in video time, it's going to be half of that because it's sped up twice. And then here, it's going to transition to the version that has some extra maps. So as you can see now, you can see kind of like the reflections on the character, kind of like reacting to the light in the scene. So, if you look on the hair, for example, like you see the blue highlights there. So I'll show you how to generate the maps based on, everything that we're going to be creating here. So we'll be able to create a, fully hand-painted asset, kind of self-lit, and then also an asset that looks very similar, but that can be plugged into a game engine where you have a specular map, your normal map, something that looks a little bit more current gen. So, for like a little bit more advanced mobile games, things like that. So, it's super convenient. We'll be able to create two types of assets that are broadly used in mobile games now, and even some computer games still. So let's get to work. And we're going to begin here in ZBrush. So that's going to be the first step. And the first step for everything, it always starts in ZBrush. And since we don't have a character, we're starting from nothing. I just grabbed one of the the default tool here that we have in ZBrush. So called this one's called Julie. As you can see, she's a gorgeous specimen. So she looks terrible, but it's a good start still. So there's the proportions are kind of okay. The anatomy is a little bit wonky, but we are going to be working off of this. So I don't want to start from nothing because that's just a waste of time, and that never happens in the industry. So if you begin working somewhere as a junior, or even as long as you're not a senior, basically, you'll never work off of nothing. So you'll always start with something that's already there. So whether it be like a full body or like a base body or something like simple, like what we'll be working here first. We'll be starting with the base body itself, kind of like just a naked version with not much to it, with no details, kind of just like something that we can reuse in the future, for the next character. And we are going to be reusing this body. So I'm showing you guys how to kind of create your own. And then, once you have it, once you have something that looks a little bit better than Julie, than the default Julie in ZBrush, well, you can reuse, that same character for everything that you do in the future. So it's a huge time saver. And so that's kind of like the reasoning why. So I'm gonna be starting here, and as I said, this is sped up twice, so it's not gonna be, I'm not gonna be wasting your time basically for 32, 33 hours. So instead, it's going to be half of that. So it's still going to be a really, really long time, but it'll allow me to show you the entire process. Something that would probably take you, if you were to work at a studio, something that would take you something like a week and a half to 2 weeks, in working time. So it's a fairly, elaborate asset. So it's not something super simple. And so we'll be covering the whole thing. So what I've been doing so far, very, very simple stuff, and that's going to be kind of the deal with ZBrush here. So I use very simple tools, not much to it. So there's a lot of move, like masking selections, and moving things around, and that's pretty much it. So especially for this first part here, where I just want to kind of finesse her silhouette a little bit because it looked kind of crappy before. So I want to give it something that, like a silhouette that looks a lot more stylized, something like what I have on the left here. So this is what I'm basing my base model off of. So you can see like much wider hips, longer legs, like smaller torso compared to the head. And so right now I really don't care if things are dirty. This is not meant to, all the details that you see on the base model there, it's all going to be sculpted over. So I really, really don't care about the details. I just wanted something to start from. It could have been like a stick figure. It could have been a male character. It really doesn't matter. It's just, you move stuff around. give it a silhouette that you like, and then everything is going to be resculpted. Like the hands, even the hands, the details that are there, they're kind of bad already. So the hand we're gonna be redoing everything. Same with the feet, same with the face. So move things as much as you want, deform things as much as you want. It really doesn't matter. Once you're done with this, as long as the proportions are fine, that's all that's important. The character can look like a puddle of mud, like inside, like the muscles and all this stuff. It can look like crap. That's not a problem, as long as the silhouette is fine. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. So I'm rotating around the character, trying to see, trying to look at it from different angles, seeing if things look all right. And of course, for this you can use reference, always best. In my case, I'm just going off of the drawing here that I had. So I really want to make sure that I nailed those proportions. So here you can go ahead and click like the at the top here, the transparency of the ZBrush window, so you can see things that are behind. So it's really cool to know to nail the proportion of a character if you have a reference to compare it to. So right now I'm just moving it around. We're going to be modeling the one, the final model, as you can see, is the one on the right. So the one with the two like big blue balls. That doesn't sound great. The one with the two glowy spheres next to hanging from the side of our head. So I want to make sure that the proportions are kind of good, and already they're pretty much there. So I just need to make the head a little bit bigger maybe. But proportions wise, as you can see here, it's a little bit deformed. The knees are probably a little bit too low too. But as far as the length of the limbs and like general proportions, it's getting there. So dynamesh. So this is something that we'll be using quite a lot. So as you can see here, I started with Jolie, and she was already kind of high res. Even now dynameshing, I'm at something like 1 million something. So dynamesh is going to be, the way I approach it is you dynamesh at a kind of like a lower number at the beginning, when the details don't really matter, and then as you move along with your model, as you start adding smaller and smaller and smaller detail, you change your dynamesh settings so that becomes higher and higher, so that you can actually support those details with your topology. So right now, as you can see here, that's why I'm dynameshing with something that's a lot lower, because I don't need all those polygons right now. I'm just trying to work on the general shapes. So here I'm at like 500 for the body. So that's pretty much that's pretty good. And then also when when your mesh is a little bit lower density, it's the smooth tool works a lot better. So it actually softens much faster, which is great. So a lot of it, as I said, is going to be using a set of very simple tools. So I'll be using move quite a bit, and H polish also, and trim dynamic, and then two more pretty much. So this I'll be using the standard brush with a like one of the default alphas to get some nice like creases and folds and things like that. And then also we'll be using dam standard, and you can all find those in the in the tools menu. It's all standard stuff, all default ZBrush tools. And then as I said, dam standard for the to get kind of like seams or like deeper crevices, deeper cracks, things like that. So now I'm starting to work on the anatomy. So I'm liking the silhouette that I have, and obviously the anatomy is all wonky. So we need to fix that for sure. And this is well, I'll be using also an extra tool here, which is the move, translate, and rotate tool. So this is great to to change the scale or the rotation or the position of big elements once all at once. So for example, here I want to make the head a little bit bigger. you just select everything but the head, so you can use the masking option, and then you select the head and then you invert so that only the head remains unselected, and then you can just go ahead and click on the on the scale tool up there and scale it up. So exactly what I'm doing right now, except this time I'm just moving it up a little bit. So yeah, now the silhouette's starting to look a little bit better. The head was a little bit too low and a little bit too small compared to the drawing. You see also I've separated the hands in this case and the feet, because those I want to keep higher density. Otherwise, what happens is that when you dynamesh, the fingers kind of like merge together, and I want to avoid that. So there are ways to avoid that too, but just for me, I find it just simpler to split the hand into a different subtool. So the way you do this is just you select the polygon, so you make your selection for what you want to separate into a different subtool, and then you can just go ahead and in your subtool menu there's a split option, and then split by group, split selected or split by group or something like that, and then it'll create a new subtool with whatever you have selected in your mask. So that's what I did with the hands, I believe. So as you can see here, I'm using H polish to kind of move things around a little bit. I'll be also using the clay tool to add muscle mass. That's another great one that I don't use too often, but at the beginning of a character like this, to define the shapes a little bit better. Once you're done, with your general silhouette, it's a great tool to add details. Kind of like broad, bigger, more rough details. So here again, there's always a lot of rotation around the character that goes on, because it might look fine from one angle, and then you rotate it, and you might have moved something from a different angle that doesn't look good in that different angle all of a sudden. So it's really, really important to look around your character, and if you have an anatomy figure, for example, on your desk, that's also a really, really good plus. So if you don't have one, you can find one online, probably like a digital version, or having the physical kind of like anatomy sculpture next to you, so that you can yourself rotate around the thing as you're rotating around in ZBrush, to look at the character from all the different angles, to make sure that the anatomy is fine, because it's one of the things at the beginning. It's really what ruins a character when the anatomy is not right. The face and the anatomy, both of them are just it's so simple to fix, as long as you use a lot of references and spend enough time on it. You can always get it to look almost like 100% close to the reference. But just using references, it shouldn't be underestimated. So this body here is going to be used for the hand painted character, and also since my the PBR version that we're going to be doing in the next chapter, so the next big chapter, we're going to be using basically this body now that we're creating. So I want to make sure that it looks nice, that it's polished enough that I can use it in other situations, in other scenarios. So instead of starting from the default Julie tool that I started from with at the beginning of this chapter, I'll be starting with this instead. So it'll be exactly kind of like the style that I'm looking for, kind of like exactly the proportions that I'm looking for. So yeah, you save a lot of time this way. So the tools I'm using here for especially they're all default except the standard tool. What I like to use is the this alpha here that I have. You can see here, just you could create your own as well, but it's like a soft build up to a pointy kind of pointy center, like a like a more dense white at the center, and then it diffuses, fades out to black a lot faster than the other ones. And this is great for like things that I'm doing right now. So like like folds or cracks or wrinkles, things like that. Because the default standard is just this soft round brush, and it works sometimes, but for things that are a little bit more, that needs to be a little bit more defined, with this alpha it works a lot better. As you can see here, this is a good example of what it does. It's like a nice sharp edge, and I use it in negative. So by default it just adds stuff. So if you draw, it'll add clay. But if you press Control, or is it Alt, I believe, it subtracts instead. So yeah, I alternate between the two a lot. So I dig in, and then I extrude, dig, extrude like this, and then soften, and that's pretty much the process. So when I work on characters like this, I like to, I don't do characters from scratch too much, because I already have different base meshes, like the one I'm building right now. This is just for the sake of this tutorial. I'm building another one, but yeah, normally I'll start from the from a base mesh that I have. But if I don't, if I'm making it from scratch like this, and actually this also applies to kind of any model that you would do. I start fairly low for the whole character, so 500,000 active points, pretty good number. So it's still a lot, but you don't have too much details. That it's it doesn't take much. It doesn't take long to dynamesh, which is important. And when you soften things, it softens really quickly because because it's not dense. And I work my way around the entire body like this, adding details, slowly adding like bigger shapes, and then refining those shapes as I go. But I don't work on one area in particular and kind of like finish it and then move on to the rest. I work on the entire body. So I want the whole thing to look kind of like the same level of finish throughout the process. So as you can see here, I split up the head so that I can subdivide the head a little bit more without having to subdivide the body. So again, I just made a selection for the head, and then went into the subtool menu, and then split selected. And then it created a different subtool for the head. So at this point, I really don't care about having visible seams on my character. As you can see here on the neck, you can clearly see where I cut it, and that's fine. We're going to be merging things later when we need to. And we're going to be cleaning all that up, so it's not a problem. So right now, I wanted, as I said, I wanted more resolution for my head, because it was a little bit too faceted, so you could see, all the polygons. And if I wanted to, I could have subdivided, but then it would have subdivided the entire body as well. So I didn't want to go that high, that quick. So by just having by just making a selection out of what you're working on at the time, it allows you to not destroy your machine too early. So if you have a computer, for example, that's not really powerful. It's a good idea to do that for almost everything. So whatever you're working on, like whatever tiny part that you're working on, just split it up into a different subtool. You can also hide everything else, and just work on that subtool, and combine everything only when you need to. So for the ears, I'm not going to be using this trick too much, because it has its limited uses, I guess. But in this case, you can always select. You can always make a masking selection. So you select, you draw on a mask, and then you can extract that. So as you can see, I painted the ears, and then went to the move option, and then moved those ears. After inverting the mask, move those ears out, and I can add more details. And then, of course, when you do that, where you extract it on the edges, it's going to be very low res. So it's good after you do a move like that to subdivide again, to dynamesh again. I mean, so that it'll add more polygons, behind the ears, so that you can actually dig in like this. So just working on all the different features, making sure everything is there. It doesn't have to look good as long as it's as long as it's in the right place. I just want to get a rough silhouette that looks like your character as soon as possible. And this one has big ears, so here again, I made a big selection. I selected the tip of the ears and then inverted. And then I'm moving the ears out a little bit. So it's super dirty, but it does the trick. And then you subdivide right after, not subdivide, dynamesh right after, like I just did. And then you have your ears. Suddenly you have enough densities that you can move things around, and it still looks smooth. Just moving them around with the move tool, trying to get a silhouette that looks okay. All right, that's starting to look decent. And yeah, for ears, I mean, again, ears are not that complicated, but at the beginning, when you don't really know their anatomy, they're a little bit overwhelming. So again, just look at reference for what ears should look like, and then go ahead and just sculpt it in, like really, really roughly, like I'm doing right now. So I'm just using the standard tool here with with the same old alpha that I'll be using pretty much the whole time. And then yeah, just add the details, push things out, pull things out, get all those little like folds in the ears, and then soften, and then refine, and then soften, and then refine, and then that's pretty much the process. And of course, like once you get inside like this, and the polygons, since you've been pushing a lot and pulling a lot, the polygons start to be a little bit. The count starts to be a little bit too low, so that's when you have to dynamesh again. So whenever you dig a lot, whenever you pull things a lot, always dynamesh afterwards. So it's starting to look like an ear already. Quick dynamesh, there we go. And of course, for this, I'm working with symmetry on. To toggle symmetry, you can just press X on your keyboard, or you can go into the the transform menu at the top and enable symmetry. Because I don't want to have to model those ears twice. So for the longest part, stick with symmetry on as much as you can, especially for game assets where the textures are limited, so the texture size and the space that you have to work on textures is limited. So you want to mirror as many things as possible. So for the ears, for example, I don't want to have to unwrap these ears twice. There really is no point in having them be different unless the character is like the main character and you really want that character to have like an ear that's different. For example, like the ear got cut or something, like it's cut in half. but those are still things that you change at the very end. So for the longest time, we'll be working with symmetry on, especially for base body like this, because yeah, we want both sides to be the same. So I'm going to be adding the eyeballs. So I just inserted 2 spheres, and then I'm moving them into position. So they're obviously a little too small, but we can fix that, no problem. And these are not going to be the final eyes. They're just there so that I know how to sculpt the eyelids around it. So we're not going to use those eyes. They're just, it's just completely temp. So they're just in place there to give me some sort of guide to model the rest. So I want the silhouette to be a little bit exaggerated, as you can see here. So the nose is poking out a lot. And from the front, it doesn't look like it is too much, but when you go on the side, you look at it from the side, the nose is super pointy. So here I increased the dynamesh count, the dynamesh resolution a little bit, so that I could start working on the finer details. So especially things like around the eyes, like smaller fold, eyelids, things like that. It needs a little bit more resolution, otherwise it doesn't look quite right. So that's why. When you need more details, just increase the number a little bit. Still using the same old tools, like move and the standard. So really nothing complicated with this. Super basic stuff. I'm refining that nose. So the nose was just this kind of like blob that was there, and then I'm just adding the details. So the same process for everything else. Just get the rough shapes in, and then when that looks okay, then you start adding details, and then you refine some more, make sure that it actually works. So she looks a little bit strange right now, but yeah, it'll be fixed. And again, for the head too, it's very important to rotate around it to make sure that every angle works fine. And I'm working with perspectives on, as you can see here on the right. The little orange button is checked. But it's good to go back and forth between perspective and no perspective, orthographic views, when you're sculpting a face especially. Because depending on what game engine this is going to be plugged in once the character is done. The game engine might not have the same focal length as ZBrush. So the perspective might look a little bit different, and the heads might look a little bit different, depending. So it's good to go between the two extremes. In this case, perspective and absolutely no perspective. So you get, you get to see your character in a broader ranges of possible scenarios. And of course, with ZBrush, ZBrush is famous for crashing all the time. So make sure that you save your stuff, like too much. Or enable autosave every 5 minutes. I wouldn't go any higher than that. It's just, there's nothing more frustrating than losing work. So you will see me save quite a lot, throughout the whole process. I've been scarred by ZBrush too many times. The structure of the face, starting to look okay. There's just now it's just like final stuff, smaller details, kind of like where fat accumulates, where the muscles are, kind of like defining those muscles a little bit more, defining the bone structure of the jaw. So even if you're drawing like something that doesn't exist like this, it's always good to use a reference. So you might even want to start with a sculpt that looks a lot more human, and then deform it so that it looks a little bit more, like whatever you want it to look like in the end. So in this case, kind of like a plant fairy or whatever these are. So because I've done many faces in my career, I kind of know that it'll look kind of off for a good amount of time, and in the end it'll always look kind of okay. So I know the end result. I can kind of predict where I am right now in the process. I know that am I doing okay, or should I be looking at references because I don't know what I'm doing. Right now I happen to know, which is great. But before, when I started this, you start sculpting a face and you really have no idea how it's going to end up. Like you've never, especially if you've never modeled a face or sculpted a face, you don't know how much it's going to how much time it's going to take you until it looks like something that doesn't look like a monster. So it's a little bit more nerve-wracking. But if you use references, that always kind of solves it, because then you have a target to look at too. So when I started ZBrush, I was always a little bit cocky where I wouldn't use reference much. I would just try to sculpt and then sculpt something until it looks like something good to me. And then obviously it was still garbage, and when people would see it, it'd be like, ugh. And the same, you get used to it when you work on something for a long time. And then you start to think that, oh yeah, that actually looks pretty good. And then you look at a real person, or like another model that's done by someone who knows what he's doing. And then suddenly you look back at yours, and then you realize that it was actually garbage. So yeah, having references along the way throughout the entire process definitely solves that issue. So yeah, don't get cocky. Don't do like I did. So I'm just trying to get a nice shape for the eyes. So obviously, my concept here doesn't really have much details for the face, so it's very small and it's super stylized. So it's there's not much volumes there to work off of. So the head is one of the things where it's going to be, I'll have a lot more freedom in terms of how to design it. So the kind of face that she's gonna have is going to be fairly different. Because I didn't spend much time on the design of the face itself. So yeah, that's an area where I'll have to be a little bit more creative. And by the way, if you're following along, this is going to be a long ride, as I said. So you could do one of these chapters every day or something like that, or take 2 days for each chapter and be able to follow along. And create the same character. That is completely fine. So that at any given moment you have an idea of where you are compared to where you should be at. And as far as the progress that I'm making. So again, those eyes are not going to be, I'm not going to keep them, so it's just temporary. I just want something that looks a little bit more human right now, so having those eyes in there definitely help. And eyes, again, just like the base body, if you have eyes that you make once that really look good, then save them as an OBJ or something, and then so that you can always import them back into any new character that you create. So working in 3D is just it's all about saving time and being smart about how you do things. So you can be very good, but artistically, but terrible at managing kind of like your own assets. And then as a result, you end up sucking because you waste so much time and everybody else just gets ahead of you in that sense. So yeah, whenever you're working on something, try to see how it could be reused at some point in the future and make it accordingly. It might mean that it will take a little bit longer to create that first one so that it's created nice, so that you can create the other ones off of it. But yeah, just like programmers creating tools to automate a lot of their process. It might seem like a waste of time when you're actually creating it because you're not focusing on the task that you needed to do. But creating those assets that will help you save time later is just it's definitely worth it. So for example, this whole character here, as I said, it's going to take a little over 16 hours, and that's fast forwarded at twice the normal speed. So like I said at the beginning, this is an asset that would normally take about a week and a half to 2 weeks to create, in work time, considering you work 8 hours a day and then you have to eat, and then obviously you're not working a net 8 hours a day, as I said in the previous chapters. So considering that, this is an asset that would realistically take a regular artist about 2 weeks to create. But that is, as I'm doing it right now, starting from scratch, right? So the first chapter is going to be just creating this base body. So if you think of it realistically, that first step, you would never have to do it again. So in reality, the character itself would probably be more like a week, almost half the time because of that. So you take an extra time here, but the next time you have to create a character, you saved that much time, and then the next time it's also time that you've saved, and then it's just it makes it worth it really, really quickly. But yeah, so in reality, this character is not a 2 weeks project. It's probably more something like a week, considering you would have a base body to work off of, and then that you wouldn't start from scratch. So you can see here, I disabled perspective mode to work on the character in orthographics view for a little while. So I'll be toggling back and forth like this, so that I don't get used to one particular way of looking at the character, so that whenever I switch back, I'm not like surprised by like, oh, it doesn't work anymore. So I really want to avoid that. So you're on the right way when you toggle between perspective and no perspective, and there's no surprise. It's like, oh yeah, it still looks the same, even though the angle changes a little bit. So now I'm spending a little bit more time on the head, and that's because the body is in a good spot. I haven't spent that much time on the body, but proportions-wise, it's pretty much there, so I'm happy with it. I know the rest is going to be just smaller details and just working on the anatomy, making sure kind of like the different muscle groups are in the right place and that they are sculpted properly. But as far as the features of the body, it's pretty much there. So that's why I'm not working on it anymore, at least not until I'm done with the head. And right now I'm spending more time on the head because this is what gives a character its character. It's super important. If the head is ugly, the rest of the character can be as good as you want. The character as a whole will still read as ugly. So since this is the focal point of any character, the head, you want to make sure that it really looks nice. So it's normal to spend extra time on it. Just like on an illustration, you'll spend more time on the things that people will tend to look at for a longer period of time. So if you're working on a character, for example, most people will spend a little bit more time looking at the head of the character. So you'll spend a little bit more time polishing it and painting it than you would for the feet, for example. So the same applies here. The head will be looked at a lot more than the boots or the back of the character or the hair. So it's normal to spend more time on the head itself. Whatever is gonna have whatever attracts the most attention, proportionally work on that more. Another thing that's good also is to not just stick with one material. So you want to go and use different matte caps, so that yes, because some of them have different lights, some of them have different kind of materials. Like this one is very shiny, and the one I had before wasn't. So you go, try different ones along the way, again, so that you don't use to one thing in particular, and then when you use a different one, suddenly it doesn't look right anymore. So there are different matte caps that are very sensitive to light. So if the surface is not perfectly smooth, like, you will definitely see it more than others. So those are good to use, as you're sculpting, because whatever you're sculpting right now, this is what we're going to be using to bake later on. So you want the surfaces to be clean as possible, so that your bake is as clean as possible. So, if you have a surface that's all wonky and kind of like, like all muddy and like not smooth, that's going to translate into your bakes. So you definitely don't want that. And using matte caps that have a lot of contrast, or some more intense lights attached to them, and that definitely helps kind of spot those mistakes. So again, still just moving things around with the simple tools that I mentioned at the beginning. When we do the hair, it's going to be a little bit different, but I mean, for the most part, this character is going to be done using those tools. So there's nothing that advanced. You really don't have to learn that many things in ZBrush to be able to do the same thing here, which is great. So now I'm going to be working on the eyebrows, and what I'm struggling with right now is I'm trying to paint the mask, and it's not working because I'm using a material that is there to show kind of like bump. So I'll make sure to change that right now. All right, so I changed the material, and now I'll be able to draw my masks properly. So that the material I was using is just it's one particular to see, like if you're working with bump or something like that, it shows it, but it doesn't show the mask, so it's kind of annoying. So yeah, it took me a little bit too long to figure that out. But anyways, here I am back into back with the basic shader. Nice smooth surface, and then now I'm going to be working on the eyebrows. So what I do with the eyebrows is just paint those in with a mask, freehand mask, which is nice because it gives you like the opportunity to really refine it and give it the shade that you want. And then you just go ahead and extract. So in Subtool, extract, and yeah, you can try with different numbers there, like different thickness. But obviously, they're eyebrows, so you don't want them to stick out too much. And the first thing I do after that is you make sure that you have, as soon as you do an extraction like this, especially if you want some symmetry on it, as soon as you're done, you press X so that symmetry is activated right away, so you don't work on one side and then forget about the other one. And then, just go ahead and kind of like smooth everything, and then do a ZBrush. and then smooth again so that you get a nice clean shape. Otherwise, if you don't do those steps, you know, if you don't ZBrush and smooth, you get kind of like what I had at the beginning, which is a very jittery line, jittery outline, which yeah, it doesn't look good. But like this, it's nice and soft and round, so it's perfect for eyebrows. Just moving them around in the right position with a big move brush. So when you create a character like this, especially, you know, if this is going to be for a game, you don't want to give the character too much emotion, because animators will hate you. So you want the character to be as neutral as possible, and that means, you know, with the eyebrows, you don't want the eyebrow to look, you don't want the eyebrows to make your character like it's make it look like it's angry. So you try to find like the most neutral position possible. Same with the mouth. You don't want the character to be smiling or anything like that, because if the character is going to be animated later on and then he has to talk or something like that, or look angry, then the animator has to fight kind of like the default smiling look that the character always has, and that's just, it's never good. And yeah, if you don't want enemies in your team, don't do that. Always make it look as neutral emotion-wise as possible. Now we're going to be doing the head. So for the head, I'm just going to mask out kind of like the hairline. That would kind of work for this character. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same I did for the eyebrows, but for the hair this time. So an extract, and as you can see here, it was a little bit too thin. So I increased the distance. So now I have something that looks okay. And I already accepted, and as you can see here, I forgot to deselect the eyebrow, so it also created eyebrows for it. So I'm just gonna isolate the helmet there that I created, and then split the eyebrows out of that subtool and then delete them because I don't need them. And now I'm going to go and clip those bits that I don't need. So clip doesn't work with symmetry, but that's fine. You can go ahead, modify symmetry, and then mirror and weld once you're done, just like this. And I'm gonna go ahead and ZBrush here a little bit, so that when I smooth, I'm smoothing a nicer edge flow, so that it smooths nicer. There we go, something like that. So yeah, for hair, I always kind of do the same thing. So you start, and that's just like the style that I want to go for as well. So, you know, if you want to do hair blades, for example, for your character, you can go ahead and, you know, do that kind of like in Maya or something like that if you don't want to do that in ZBrush. But for me, the hair that the look for the hair that I like kind of is looks like clay almost. You know, like it's always one big clump. So for this, it's really good to just keep it like just like a sculpt. You know, like treat the hair as everything else. It's no different. So here, yeah, just use the snake hook deformer to move the hair, kind of try to play with the silhouette a little bit. So that's super dirty, as you can see here. Like my polygons is stretching like crazy, but that's fine. You just do a dynamesh again, and then it should be fine. And now I am, yeah, that's a problem right there. So it's like an empty shell. It's not what I wanted. So for this, the reason why it's not pushing the outer edges, you know, when I do this, is because I went ahead and in the brush tab, you select masking, and then you you make sure that your back face is toggled on, so that whenever you work on one side, so let's say you're working on like a fold on one side, it's not gonna affect the other side if the brush is too big. So you'll always be working on just one side. So this is great, if you have something that's really, really thin and you want to move it around or like add details to it. Always make sure that your back face masking is set to, is enabled. So yeah, again, in the brush tab, you'll see masking, and then you can trigger it there, because by default it's not on. And in some scenario, you might also want to disable it. So when you're moving things around, or when you're extracting things, or like polishing things with H polish, it doesn't do a great job when masking is on. So you might want to disable it for in those situations. But just like the face here, I want to also work in symmetry for the hair. So the hair at the center of it is not going to be symmetrical, otherwise that will look kind of weird, with all the different hair strands. The symmetry is going to be way too obvious. But for the sides, at least, and like to begin, I want to make sure symmetry is on. So I saved myself some work. And the sides of the head, the sides of the hair, the sides of the head, that's going to be still symmetrical, because you'll never be able to look at both sides, at the same time. And that means that you'll never notice if they're the same or not. But when you look at the character from the front, things should look as symmetrical, because otherwise, it looks cheap. So once I work on the center part of the haircut that I'm working on, then I will disable the symmetry. But for now, I'm just trying to get a nice shape, a nice big shape of the hair, and that's the process. It's just a big, just one big clump of hair, and then I'll be adding some hair blades to it to break the symmetry a little bit, and also make it look a little bit more like hair. But for now, I'm just trying to make sure the silhouette is fine, that it's big enough, that it flows nice. Here I'll be inserting spheres on the face and kind of moving them in the position that I want. And that's, you can already guess what this is for. This is for the big spheres that she has on each side of her head. So yeah, kind of moving the spheres around. And then I want to make sure that we divide those so that we have enough resolution on it. And what I'm gonna do is extend kind of like the sideburns there, and then do a dynamesh so that suddenly this mesh is connected, as you can see here. So again, just, masking, moving, dynameshing. You can create so many things like this, especially for anything organic. This is it's great, simple tools. So now I'm working on a portion of the head, the little like two antennas bit. So again, I'm just going to draw it on the hair. So I always work off of things that I already have, because it's just a lot simpler this way. Instead of having to do something from scratch, you just draw it. You draw the silhouette, and then you extract it, clean it up, do smooth, ZBrush, smooth again. As I said, that's always the same process. And remember, as soon as you extract and ZBrush, you want to make sure that you enable symmetry. So always press X after that. And then just move things around. And if you forget, to have symmetry, to toggle symmetry on, you can always do a mirror and weld. And then for that, make it a habit, working always on the left side of your character, because when you mirror and weld, it mirrors the left side onto the right one. So if you don't do that, if you work on the right side, then you can always kind of like mirror your mesh and then do a mirror and weld. So you can go into deformation and kind of like do a symmetry, not a symmetry, but a a mirroring of your mesh and then do a mirror and wall, but it's an extra step, so there's really no point. Just make sure that you're always working on the left side, so that when you do a mirror and walled, you don't have to do anything else, it just works. But even better, if you don't have to do that, is just working with symmetry on all the time. So obviously this is one of the pieces that's going to be definitely not symmetrical, especially everything that's in the center of the body. You don't want it to be symmetrical because it makes it too obvious. That's where you notice the symmetry the most. So for any piece of armor, you don't want symmetry toggled on when you're working on it from the front or from the back. So you always want to make it a little bit different. Otherwise, it just doesn't look natural. So here, H-polish, which is, as I said, another of my go-to tools in ZBrush. Very great to get some nice smooth surfaces. And also pretty good for hard surface to some extent. So I exported the tool that I had, and now I'm going to be building eyelashes for the character. So it's one of the things that I could have extracted in ZBrush, but in this case, it's very simple to just do it in Maya or any whatever software, sculpting software, not sculpting, whatever modeling software you'll be using for this, and kind of just do the final version here already, so that you can import that into ZBrush. You never have to subdivide it; just leave it kind of like low poly, and then you can also, once you're done with your high poly, use the same mesh, and it'll be done already. So you can just do the UVs for that later. So you do it once and it's done forever, basically. Really no point in having really high poly eyelashes unless you're modeling each individual eyelash, which is not the case here. I'm going for something that looks a lot more stylized. So it's just going to be kind of like one piece around the eye. Yeah, just going around the eye, trying to find a shape that looks nice. And here I am gonna duplicate this instead of I could have just created a new plane, of course. But yeah, since I already have something here, I can just duplicate this plane, push it out, and let's start from this to create the eyelashes from the bottom eyelid, for the bottom eyelid. So the process is going to be fairly similar here. So I just move things around, and then I'm going to extract the edges. So select the edge, extrude into position, extrude again, extrude until you have a nice stylized eyelash going around the entire eye, almost. So I'm taking my time because yeah, this is going to be the final final topology for those eyelashes. So all the time that I spend here, it's not gonna be wasted. I'll end up reusing it. So it's starting to look pretty good now. So I'm gonna export that, duplicate it on the other side inside of Maya. Why not? I could have done that in ZBrush too, but just make sure that it looks nice this way. It's easier to see when you have both eyes done. So I'm gonna go ahead and go into append. So I'm gonna pop a new temp model in here, select it, and then import the eyelashes so that it replaces. And I noticed here that my faces were inverted, so I'm just inverting the normals on my faces so that they point in the right direction, because right now the faces are still there. They were just pointing back, so I would only see the eyelashes if I were looking kind of like from the back of the head a little bit. So I could have seen them then, but instead I'm just gonna fix the normals for the planes instead, and then just re-imported them, and there we go. So now it's starting to look decent. There's still a couple of things that are bugging me with her face. But all the features are there. So, you know, now there's not much to add. She's got hair already. She's got her eyelashes, her eyes, everything, like eyebrows. Everything's in place. Now it's just fine-tuning everything. Make sure that it looks really good. During this step, it's very easy to get used to your seeing your model and kind of stop noticing the flaws with it. So going back and forth, you know, doing this and doing something else, or making sure, as I said at the beginning, that you always have reference to always compare to. It's super helpful because yeah, like once when I was younger, when I was starting, I would work long stretches of time on a particular head sculpt, and then I would think, you know, it's looking pretty good, and then walk away from it and come back the next day and then have the surprise, like, oh, what happened there? And then realize, you know, after giving myself a nice break from it and then coming back to it, realizing that it's not that great after all. And you just, you know, that problem just goes away the second you use references. The worst is to work in a vacuum. So the final details that I'm starting to work on right now, those actually change a lot of the, they change the character quite a bit. They change the look of a character quite a lot, like the shape of the jaw, the shape of, you know, the different surfaces. And so at this point, I wasn't really like, the character looked pretty generic, which is fine, especially at the beginning. You don't want it to look too particular. But as you go and as you add more and more details, that's when the character really starts to take its to get its character. But that's also the steps that require the most references, because it's really easy to mess up, because the details are a lot more subtle. So I'm not super happy with the eyebrows right now. As you can see from me kind of moving them around quite a lot. So I'm trying different shapes, different positions. Nothing's quite working. So when that happens, you just don't waste your time. Kind of just move on to something else, and then come back to it later with a fresh look on it. So here I'm just trying to add kind of like the skull details on the head a little bit more. The skull is a hard bone structure, and then it definitely shows when you look at a head, especially a shaved head in this case. You can always clearly see where the skull is. So it's important to to still do that for your character. And then as opposed to kind of like the different muscle groups for the rest of the body, the bone structure for the head is really good to use for reference points, because there's not much muscles to use as reference on the head, on the skull itself. But if you use the bone structure underneath, so the structure of the skull, if you learn that and you use that as reference, it's a great help to prevent your head anatomy from looking off. And then for the rest of the body, just use muscle groups. Once you know them all, it's very hard to mess up your anatomy, because it's just it's just blocks connecting into another block, into another block, into another block. And if all the blocks are there, and they're all connected to the right place, then it should look already like a human. It's much harder to mess up. So the ears here is a good example of having a sculpt that's a little bit wobbly, a surface that's a little bit wobbly. So you want to make sure that you clean that up, because that's all going to bake otherwise. So yeah, make sure everything is clean. And the back of the ear, you're probably not going to see it much, but in some angles you might. So definitely do spend a little bit of time on it. So it's pretty much done. I'm in a good spot now with the face. I've added a lot more details, and the ears were kind of falling behind as far as the the density of not the density, but the how far I pushed it. So now I'm just making sure that I go over everything and polish everything up, add those details, clean up those surfaces, make those creases nice and crisp, make all the volumes kind of read a little bit better, just like with the face. With the ears, it's really easy to always run out of polygons because there's so many creases there and like so many different volumes that intersect and interconnect. So, dynamesh is your friend. Use it a lot when you're working on ears. So now the side of the head here, it looks kind of flat right now. So I'm going to make sure that I add those details in, make sure that I emphasize those cheekbones, and kind of work on how the fat is kind of spread around the face, because right now it's not quite correct. Make sure you save again. And with ZBrush, do incremental saves whenever possible, because it does happen once in a while, once in a full moon, that your file will get corrupted, and then you're trying to open it, and then you just can't, and you lost everything. So at least save often, and then save incrementally. Like, whatever file, 1, 2, 3, etc. Because it will crash. It's just a matter of when or how often. So here again, I'm just trying to refine kind of like the side of the cheeks. It didn't look quite right. The way the eyes, the corner of the eye kind of transitioned to the ears. There was some anatomy flaws in there. So I'm just trying to adjust kind of like the sculpt underneath, the skull underneath, so that it shows a little bit more, and then mix in with the face muscles that begin around the ears and around the eyes. So those are normally visible on most faces. And constantly rotating around, again, super important. And to be honest, at this point, I could probably stop, the sculpting process for the face. Not the sculpting process as a whole, but for the face, definitely. If this is going to be just a hand-painted asset. So I would have more than enough information there to give me a really, really nice base to start painting the textures, hand painting the textures in the later steps. But in my case, since I wanted to show you how to create not only the hand-painted version, but kind of like generate the other maps from there. So the normal map, the specular map, and then the emissive map as well. so that we have two different types of assets. So one that's fully hand painted, and then the other one that's hand painted, but still has kind of like the more common different texture maps to plug into most game engines. So the benefit of hand painted obviously is that you don't need light sources in your scene because it's self-lit. So all the highlights are kind of painted in. And that works great because it makes for very, very light assets, and you can run if you make a game with just hand painted assets, then you can literally run it on anything, like even a toaster, since it's so not demanding for any computer, unless your texture size is incredibly big, but that would kind of be stupid a little bit. But yeah, so the hand painted version is kind of like the lightest possible version that you can have, and from there, you can go up a little bit and go on go do something that's a little bit more similar to the majority, I would say, of all the mobile games, which use kind of like an old gen tech, because that's all the phones can support, which is fine. But that includes kind of like what I was talking about in the previous chapter. So the diffuse, the specular map, the normal map, and then potentially an emissive map. And you can easily generate those, using this workflow that I'm showing you. So if I were to do fully like 100% hand painted, I would probably not even go into ZBrush. I would just start with you do kind of like a block out in Maya or like whatever modeling software that you're using, do a rough blockout in there, then do the UVs, and then go straight to painting the textures after that. So it'd be like 3 easy steps. There would be no baking involved or anything like that. But in this case, it allows you a lot more flexibility, and it's a little bit more artistic. You have control of what you're creating pretty much the whole time, as opposed to a fully hand painted asset, like super old school, where you only see the final asset once you're done painting it. In this case, you have your high poly to look at, so that what it's going to look like. It's just a matter of like the types of finish that you apply in the end, but right away, or at least very early on in the process, in the pipeline, what your character is going to look like, what your asset's going to look like. So by doing it this way, as I said, if you were going to do just hand painted version, the kind of sculpting information that I have already would be enough, and then you would go ahead and just paint the rest of your result of your details with paint. You wouldn't be counting on the normal map and the bakes for that, because to be fair, like, you're not going to see much difference. If I were to bake right now the face at least, and then bake the final version of the face, so in a little bit once I'm done with it, when we do the hand painted part, not much is going to be different. But what is going to be very different is the resulting normal map. So if we don't use a normal map, then that's fine. You're not going to notice much. But in this case, since I want to have the two versions, so the hand painted version and then the hand painted version plus the other extra maps, then we'll see. It will definitely see the details. So that's why I'm spending a little bit more time on it than normal. And also because I was enjoying it, so I wanted to make it as good as possible. So yeah, that extra detail pass that I'll be doing is definitely going to show for that second model with all the different maps. So for like butt cracks and armpits and things like that, and this, for braids too, like I was saying earlier, like the inflate tool is really nice because it's like a soft inflate, and let's say like two different kind of like volumes are next to each other. It'll kind of merge them in a really, really nice way. Something that you can't really do with like with the regular brush or the damn standard. It's great to remove kind of like any gap in between two volumes. And yeah, so now like what I do generally for characters here is go really heavy on the muscles, even for females. And then, you know, if needed, I'll tone it down later. But by drawing the muscles like this, you know, it's really hard to mess up your anatomy. You just, you know, you draw every muscle where they should be, and then after that you soften things up if needed. But then, you know, at least you're sure that all the muscles are in the right place. If you don't do this step, if you just straight up kind of you know, start sculpting the skin on top, it's always a little bit harder to make sure that your muscle anatomy is correct. So I see this as like you know, dressing up the character almost. So the first layer is the just the muscles, the pure muscles, and then after that, you know, you add the second layer on top, and you soften everything up. It's like the layers, the skin layer. So in terms of sculpting, I mean, you can just start by sculpting everything, like sculpt all the muscles, define them all really well, and then after that, you know, the second pass, you just go over everything and kind of like just use the soften brush and soften everything to simulate, you know, to simulate kind of like skin over everything, the effect that it would have, the softening effect that it would have on all the different volumes and shapes. So obviously in a drawing, you know, the character is taking a pose, striking a pose, so I don't want to model that in. So, you know, the butt is sticking up way too much. So for mine, I want it to have more of a relaxed kind of pose, but still with a slight arc to the back. I don't want her to be like too straight, you know, too stiff. The default position should still be kind of like relaxed. So adding the muscles at the lower back. And again, here I went for a you know, material that's very shiny, and I'm alternating between the two of them. So one that's more matte, like this one doesn't have any specular, and one that has like a very sharp specular, to make sure I'm not forgetting anything, you know, with the volumes, or not noticing something. So here you can see like the effect of dam standard. It's really nice to get those nice creases. For the side of the legs. And like right now I'm starting to have, you know, in those, especially that area, I'm starting to need a little bit more polygons. So you could definitely, you know, at this point, like when you start to see things get a little bit nasty, like in the corners, you know, add more polygons, do a dynamesh to fix that problem. Now I was just trying to play with like different, like pushing the anatomy of the leg a little bit too much, and it didn't read that well, so I'm just gonna go softening most of it. So just like everything, you know, we want to be rotating around those legs as much as possible when we sculpt. And the legs are very particular, at least for me. You know, they're definitely not cylindrical. So, you know, legs, you know, you can just look at this and be like, it's just a cylinder, you know, like that tapers down a little. That tapers down a little bit as you move closer to the knee, but it's definitely not that way. So the shape is very interesting. So yeah, you definitely have to look at it from the different angles to be able to sculpt it properly. So yeah, just decided to hide the concept at this point. it's not really helping anymore. So right now, I have my silhouette down. I have pretty much like all my proportions down. All I'm doing now is just adding like anatomy details, making sure this thing looks somewhat realistic, believable at least. Not realistic, but believable. And there's a lot of different, since I started from a model that exists already, the Julie model that was kind of modeled after a real person, or at least, it was trying to be realistic, and I definitely do not want that. So I'm trying to simplify a lot of the sculpt detail that were included, like the knees, for example. I really don't want to leave it like this, even though that's correct, anatomically correct. That's not what I'm going for. So I want to kind of like merge all those, merge a lot of those smaller shapes into bigger ones, so that instead of reading accurately from up close, it reads really, really nice from a distance. By simplifying the shapes, you kind of achieve that. So yeah, again, playing with the shape of the leg. I'm looking, while I'm doing this, I'm looking at the highlights as well as the silhouette to make sure that everything is correct, which is not, which, that's why I'm kind of still sculpting it. Yeah, like how the highlights behave on the surface is really important. If you look at references, and then you notice that, the highlights or like the specular hits does not hit at the same space on my model, then maybe there's something wrong with it. So that's why, look at the silhouette for sure, look at the different muscles, like the position of the model, but also look at how the light react on the surface. If it doesn't react the same, then likely the shape is not the same. The volumes are not the same. So here, so simplifying the knees a lot. Obviously, this is not realistic by any means, but it summarizes. It's like a summary of the real thing, and that's kind of what I'm going for here. Simplifying the shapes, making it like read nicely from a distance, and as a result, this will grab some really nice highlights when we do the bakes. So that's another reason why. So trying to make all those shapes kind of like as planar as possible. Like simplifying the muscles, making them like a little bit more blocky than they would normally be. It'll get a nicer bake for us to start with when we do the textures, the final textures. Same thing here, working on the calves, making it clearly stylized, but emphasizing those change of planes here, so that it grabs the light a little bit better. Same deal with the arm here. So I want to simplify those muscles here, simplify the elbow. Very similar to the knee, kind of like merging things and emphasizing the different faces and planes, so that reads a little bit better, that it catches more light. I'm trying to soften things up as I go. So with the H polish, what's nice also is that it does polish, but when you polish, you kind of push things down. But you can do the subtracting, the subtract mode. So by pressing Alt, and that kind of it still keeps kind of like this flat look to it. So like it still flattens it, but by pulling instead, so we can get some more volume back in there. So if you've been using the regular version, by using the inverted version, so by pressing Alt instead, you kind of get that volume back by pulling instead of pushing. I mean, it's the same thing for all tools. You know, if you know ZBrush, you should know this for sure. But there's a lot of the tools like this, like a lot of the basic tools that you use that have really nice kind of like opposite effect. It's one of them. Giving her belly button. So as a rule of thumb for the position of the belly button, like it changes for each person, of course. Could be much higher, could be much lower, but what I go by, generally speaking, is you kind of imagine where the nipples are, and then where the crotch is, and then you just place the belly button kind of like right in the middle. Yeah, that's kind of where it landed. So I was drawing with RGB selected. Obviously, we don't want that. We don't want to be painting color. We just want to sculpt the clay here. So make sure that's disabled. And still working on those legs. So the legs are obviously a big portion of this character. It's like easily 1/4 of the character. So I want to make sure that whenever I bake this, and that they do behave properly with the light. Because yeah, it's a big chunk of the character, and it's going to be completely exposed. So if this was hidden under like a skirt or something like that, I really wouldn't care at this point. Like it'd be good enough. But since those are not going to be covered, since they're going to be like always shown, and we want to make sure that those are really nice and accurate, anatomically at least. And now, the bigger shapes, the bigger details, all the muscle groups are kind of there. So I fixed most of the problems that I had. So I went over kind of like the whole body and fixed most of the the muscle groups. Now is the time where I zoom in and add kind of like the finer details. So all the kind of like the skin folds, the smaller the smaller details, like emphasizing certain muscle groups and not other ones, or like smoothing out certain muscles and keeping others sharp. That's kind of like the step now. Trying pinch here for the butt crack, because the butt crack is kind of like wobbly right now. It's not nice and clean. It's not a good look. So I want to make sure that we fix that. So just now, I merged the hands with the body. I'm going to be doing a dynamesh, but a much higher dynamesh this time. So the body will retain its high density, and then the hands are not gonna, the fingers are not gonna collapse because it's high enough. Same thing with the feet. Like the feet emerge as well. And now I'll be able to kind of like soften the connection between the two. Because obviously right now it looks like she's wearing gloves, and we don't want that. And I'm gonna be just using like the soft brush here to shrink the fingers so that there's some space in between, so I can start sculpting properly. Because right now they're all like way too close. If I were to do like any kind of dynamesh on this, that's not like really high. All the fingers will merge together, and yeah, that's a pain in the ass. So I'm just trying to adjust the shape. Right now the hand is way too long. Compared to its width. So I want to fix that. And obviously the fingers are like way too skinny, and they're not all the same shape. So yeah, there's a lot of work, a lot of work that needs to be done there. So we're gonna go ahead and do clay tubes. This is one of the rare occasions where we're gonna be doing clay tubes. So I did clay tubes for the braids. We're gonna be doing that for in this case here. So clay tubes is great to add muscle when there is nothing. So if you're working off of like a skeleton or something, like a base model that's really skinny, and you want to add like a lot of muscles, like you're working on like a superhero or something, clay tubes are really good to get some nice volumes going on. It sucks when it comes to time to cleaning it because it's definitely not a clean look to it. But yeah, like when you're starting, it's a really good tool to use. So in this case, my fingers are just like some soft sausages right now, and that's not how it looks. Like if you look at your fingers, there's a lot of different shapes, a lot of different volumes going on. It's really, really complex. So I like to use this tool, the clay tubes, to get all the subtle volumes in the hands. And it works great again, in a subtract mode. So you can, instead of building up the clay, you can actually take it away, subtract it from the model. So yeah, it's a great tool for for the rough pass, the initial rough pass on whatever you're working on. So here I'm going to shorten the palm, because right now the palm of the hand is way too big. So I want to shorten that. Like the palm itself is supposed to be longer, a little bit longer than the fingers, like longer than the longest finger, but still, right now was way longer. It should just be a little bit longer. So yeah, again, the good old selection and then move it. Of course, right now there's like a nasty cut in the center of the palm, but that's fine. I'm gonna do a dynamesh on that, like I just did there. Then we can just go ahead again, use clay tubes to kind of fill in the gaps and start building those muscles, those hand muscles. So dynamesh again. As you can see here, like the hand's starting to be pretty high poly, like 500,000 active points. So that's about 1 million polygons. And when it gets too high like this, it's like the softened brush doesn't work as much. Like it's not as effective. As you can see here, like I have to go over it a lot. So that's why, like when you're at this stage, when you're using the clay tubes tool, it's good to stay relatively low in terms of poly count, so that when you do use the soft brush, which you will have to do because the brush strokes are way too visible with that tool, that you don't have to go over it like 1 million times. You can just easily soften things out. When it's too high, it'll be way harder to get rid of all those brush stroke details. Even at even with smooth at 100%, which it is at by default, anyways. So yeah, for hands, it's an easy one. You can just look at your own hand and see kind of like where the different joints are, the different length, and how kind of like the skin behaves, where it accumulates, where you see the bones, all those things. So it's one of the easiest things to reference, because you have two, for most of you at least, right there at the end of your arm. So for this hand painted character, again, it's not going to be for like it's not a first person shooter, right? So the hand itself doesn't have to be super high res, and it won't be, because it's never going to be shown like super big on the screen, for whatever game we're making this. So for hand painted assets, generally speaking, is for like mobile games, as I said multiple times, but like in this case, it'd be maybe like an RPG type of game. So the hands would never be that big on the screen anyway. So you know, there's no need to spend that much time working on the details of the sculpt here. In this case, I'm still going to do it, and I'll get them to a stage, to a level that they look really, really nice, because this is my base model. So, you know, if this is your first model, I would definitely recommend that you spend a little bit more time. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that for, you know, the scope of this asset in particular, it's overkill for sure. But if this is your base body that you will use and reuse again for all the, you know, for your next projects, then, you know, do spend the time, because it'll save you. If you end up making a character that's higher res, you know, in the future, then it'll all be done already. So you'll end up saving time in the end, in the long run. When working on hands like this, it's very good to work on just the hand. So, you know, like hide the rest of the mesh so that it's not in the way all the time. Especially when you're working like up close like this, you don't want the leg to be like in the way whenever you rotate the hand in a particular angle. And it's super easy, you know, you just select whatever you want. And in this case, it's a different model. It's a different mesh, but you can just create a selection with Shift. I select whatever you want, and then, yeah. By default, it just hides everything else, everything that's not selected, and then you can work on that part of the model, you know, without worrying about the rest. So the hand is slowly starting to look like something. It's just like in this case, the fingers were so bad to begin with that it will look fine from one angle in particular, and then you rotate a little bit, and then like it looks terrible. So again, just a lot of rotating around, adding volumes where they need to be, and yeah, the hands are not like the most fun. I would say it's almost easier to start from scratch, and to start from scratch is really easy. You just you can just start from a little stump for the palm of your hand, and then you draw where the fingers can be kind of extracted from with with a mask. And then, as usual, you invert the selection and you pull the fingers out, and you can pull them out to up to the first joint, and then pull them out again for the second joint, and then again for to reach the tip. Making sure we save constantly. So one thing I always do is get rid of lazy mouse only. So you keep the other one, you keep relative, but you remove lazy mouse. And then when you do that, you have to drop the intensity of whatever brush you're using, because otherwise it's going to be way too intense compared to when it's using lazy mouse. And that's just a personal taste. Some people might like lazy mouse. I just don't like the kind of like the little dots that it leaves on when you do a clean straight line. You'll see kind of like the spacing of the brush, and you can change that, but I don't know. I like to be in complete control, but that's just, again, a personal taste. So if you're wondering what I did there, why did I remove lazy mouse, that's just yeah, that's what it is. It's just a personal taste. I never use it. I never use it in Photoshop. I don't use it in 3D. It's just Just seems annoying. Alright, so the hands are starting to look pretty good now. Obviously, there's no nails yet, and the fingers themselves are still a little bit wonky, like a little bit wobbly, especially from this angle, you can see. But again, you know, it's already way overkill for a hand-painted asset. You know, this is the kind of stuff that you would definitely do for a PBR asset, you know, especially if potentially your character is going to end up in a first-person shooter game or something like that. So as I said at the beginning, this base model is going to be reused for the PBR character we're going to be working on later. So that's why I'm spending the extra time. But for nails, you know, very simple. Again, I'm just kind of drawing the shape of the nail that I like with a mask. And then I'm going to invert the selection and pull those out a little bit. So that looks about right. So selection inverted. Then I'm going to use the H polish to flatten those, although I end up regretting that move, so we don't need to do that. Yeah, then you just use like kind of like the move brush, and then pull the tip slightly out. And then at the root, you know, it's fine if that doesn't move because it shouldn't. You know, it goes in under the skin, so it's normal that it's kind of flush with the skin. Only the tip should be elevated. So there's, you know, obviously there's better ways to do nails. So like one way that I would recommend if you're doing something that's super high res is to you know, you do those same selections, but instead of just pulling things out with the move tool, you just you extract new subtools for the nails, so that the nails are their own kind of their own subtool. And then you have full control over them, so you can like edit the thickness and you know, make sure that their edges are really clean. And then yeah, it's just it's a little bit easier if you're doing something that's super high res. In my case, like I wasn't really planning to do anything like too fancy with the fingers, so you know, I don't. As I said, the character that I was planning for this is more like an RPG character, so something that you see from a distance. You know, you'll never see the hands that up close, so that was like that's good enough, right? So the main reason why I did this is that it saves me from dealing with an extra subtool. It keeps my scene a little bit cleaner because I don't have that extra subtool. As you can see here, like on the side, on the right, I don't have that many things. And that's just, again, it's a personal taste. I know a lot of people that work with a ton of subtools and they're fine with that. Me, I don't know, like I hate scrolling. You don't have to scroll through them, but I hate having a lot of stuff. So, you know, whenever I'm done working with like a set of things, I just like merge them as soon as I can. So in this case, you know, the character is naked, so who cares, right? There's not going to be that much anyways to begin with, but you'll see later. I always try to merge things as much as possible. Then, you know, if needed, you can always split them up later. But it just keeps the scene a little bit cleaner, and it makes it easier when you want to hide certain things. So instead of having to hide every single subtool that represent every single little piece in your, you know, of your character, you can hide kind of like chunks at a time. It just saves a little bit of time. Yeah, all of that to say, that's the reason why I did the nails this way. So you can see here, good example of why you want to hide everything but the hands, because it's really annoying to have the leg in a way. Right now I don't care because I think I was almost done. Only a couple more things to do. Give the nail kind of like a curve, because right now it's a little too flat. I'm going to do the same for the other ones. Give them a bit of a curve. And you know, if you had one single nail that you did at the beginning, you could be just duplicating that nail. Like you make sure that one of them looks really good and then you duplicate it. Then you can adjust the size, of course, but I went the more manual way. Then just using the standard brush with, again, the same alpha, the same pointy alpha to define the edges of the nail a little bit better. You know, for this, you could be going like really, really crazy in the details. You know, if you look at your hand, there's so much stuff there that you could be sculpting. But with the hands and just with everything else, it's kind of the same thing. You know, like I was trying to simplify the knees, trying to simplify the calves, trying to simplify like the different muscle groups. So same thing with the hands. I don't want you know, I don't want the hands to be that different from everything else. You know, the style was it should match. So while I'm pushing the kind of like the silhouette of the hand and like adding some more realistic details in there, I'm still keeping it as you know, pretty simple. So I don't want to go in and add like some crazy amount of details there where there are no such details elsewhere. So yeah, there was some like extra stuff there, extra garbage that we want to make sure to isolate and delete. There we go. And I'm not bothering with the other side because we can always do a mirror and weld. So, oh, it looks a lot better now. There we go, mirror and weld. So now the other side is clean too. Now we're gonna move on to the feet. So the fingers are pretty much, the hands are pretty much done. Now the feet are still a disaster. So we are going to be fixing those. You know, so for the most part, like the fingers, you know, for most characters, you want them you want your character to have individual fingers that can be rigged individually. You know, so let's say you're playing with a gun, or like the character is playing with something in the game, or you know, in whatever you're using the character for. Generally speaking, you'll want the hands to be able to articulate a lot more than the feet. So you know, for the toes, there's rarely any need to separate the different toes into their own kind of like pieces. So they don't need to be split. Basically, it can be just one kind of like one shoe with toes sculpted on it. And the main reason is to save polygons, because you know, the feet, they're never the star, or at least they're very rarely the star of your character. They move really quick because you walk, so you can never like see them that well anyways in most cases. So yeah, you don't want to spend you don't want to spend polygons on something like this. So it's always good to just merge all the different toes together, especially since they're generally close enough, you know, in a relaxed position anyways. Yeah, just using the move tool, the inflate tool a little bit to get those toes, to get kind of like the crack in between the toes to disappear a little bit more. But just like with the rest, you know, you just start with the move tool a little bit, kind of push things around so that, you know, the silhouette looks mostly good from all the different angles. And then move on with the details. But yeah, details, not yet. Just trying to get the anatomy right first. And just like the hands, you know, this is one. This is an easy one because you can just look at your own toes, your own feet. So it's easy reference. Doing dynamesh. So as you can see here, all the toes now have been merged. They're all connected. And yeah, so under the feet is one of those areas where it's probably that is probably the area of the character that will be the least shown ever, because yeah, you never see the bottom of anybody's feet in a character in a game. When characters walk, I mean, you see the bottom very briefly if they run, maybe if they raise their feet high enough. But it's like lowest importance. So the accuracy of the anatomy there really is not that important. It's pretty trivial. And here, like as you can see here, I have 760 something thousand active points. So the blur or the soften brush didn't work that well. Going back to what I was saying earlier, like the higher the poly count, the least effective the soften brush is. So when you're making like those big changes to the silhouette, initially you want to keep the poly count as low as possible to get a nicer softening experience. So I just think just adjusting where the bones are there. Again, you know, like the toes, just like the fingers, they have different joints, so we want to make sure that we make those visible when needed. It's not just sausages. So here, instead of using the clay tubes, I'm just using the trim dynamic negative option. So the subtracting version, again by pressing Alt. So just very similar to H polish. It'll instead of pushing things in and making them flat, it'll pull things out while still trying to make it flat. So here again, you know, it's The heel, I'm trying to, not the heel, the bones here, I'm trying to stylize them a little bit, just like I did with the elbows and the knees and everything else. So obviously they never show this much, but yeah, here I'm just trying to give them enough volume, enough to simplify them enough that they grab some extra light when we do the bakes. Now toes starting to look pretty good. The feet overall. Using Jim Dynamic to create to flatten the tip to give me like a base for the nails. And same thing here, so we're going to be doing the contour of it with the standard brush and the pointy alpha. Softening up the details a little bit. Alright, it's starting to look pretty good, especially from a distance. You know, it reads pretty well. All the different shapes read well. Looks believable. There we go. So I'm going to be moving this up just a little bit so that when I do a dynamesh, like they connect. And that's what I'm going to be doing next. So I just merge the feet with the rest of the body, making sure I do a save before I do a big dynamesh like this, because you know ZBrush tends to fail often. So I'm going to do a pretty high dynamesh, as you can see here, the highest that I can go, so that I don't lose any resolution. And it's going to take a while for sure. There we go. Now we're done. So as you can see here, it jumped from 1 point something million to about a little over 4 million polygons. So it's definitely kept its resolution. It even increased it. So which is great, because now we're going to be working on the final details for everything. So the feet has been connected. So I'm just going to make sure I soften that connection here with H polish. And then alternating between H polish and soften. So yeah, we want to make sure we don't see that seam. And we're going to do the same thing with the hands. And softening the hands a little bit. And that's that connection. With the same deal. So by pushing and pulling, you know, using H polish, it did additive and then subtracting, the additive mode and then the subtractive mode. Kind of like a little bit of each other, you know, like you push a little bit and then you pull a little bit. You push a little bit, you pull a little bit. Otherwise, you tend to lose the shape too much. So here the dynamesh was high enough resolution that the fingers didn't connect, so they didn't merge, which is great. That was the point. I'm gonna soften everything up a little bit because they're a little bit wobbly. I've been I've been overworking them a little bit, so I'm just trying to get rid of that. Emphasize the knuckles a little bit. Again, this is just so that it grabs the light a little bit more. And the body is starting to look pretty good now. So we're at, we're just gonna do the final kind of the final details, working on the hips a little bit more, making sure that from every angles the muscle groups read well. There's still some a couple things that I want to fix on the legs. Some of the faces, the volumes are not quite right. So like for instance, like the inside here, what I'm currently painting with a mask, I'm going to invert that and kind of flatten everything out. So I'm going to click outside of the mask to soften the mask, and then invert, and then use a H polish to flatten that whole thing. Now, of course, that's going to be too much right now. You'll see, like, yeah, exactly. So when I remove the mask here, it's obviously too much, but now the volumes read a little bit better. So now all that's left is just to kind of do the soften the connections. So I'm going to go and use trim dynamic for that, because the soften brush now is just, it doesn't work that well anymore because the poly count is too high. But trim dynamic works really, really well at any resolution. So yeah, I'm just going to go and polish the edges with that. Trying to define those stomach muscles a little bit more here, like the lower abdominals. Obviously that's too much right now, but I'm gonna soften that out. There we go. So it's already looking a lot better now. And the highlights on the leg, what I'm trying to get is like a really sharp highlight, like a straight line, basically a straight highlight from the hip, from the sides of the hip all the way down to the inside, like the inner side of the knee. And I want this nice highlight to be really, really obvious from top to bottom. Right now it works at the top, but it kind of fades away a little too much before it reaches the knee. So I want to make sure that I've kind of fixed that. So yeah, we still need to soften those details inside on the inside of the leg there. It doesn't look too good now, like this. Yeah, so now it's better. Yeah, so now just doing the final touches, so doing soften everything. Now everything is pretty much in place. Muscle groups are somewhat believable, so now it's going to be a lot of H polish and soften to make things all nice and smooth, just like real skin. Using dam standard to emphasize those folds here. And when you look at like the model in a very intense angle, like I was doing, like when you push, like when you look at it from the top or from the bottom, you can really see if the surface is smooth or not. And like to help even more with that, I'm changing right now to material that has a lot more, that has specular, so we can see the highlights even better. I just realized that I didn't do the back there because it was hidden behind the hair. So just want to make sure that we add those in there. And of course, stylize them just like we did for everything else. Make them a little bit flatter and have the silhouette a little bit exaggerated. All for the sake of the read. All right. Just inspecting everywhere, making sure, trying to find any flaws that are left. Doing one last check on the head. Make sure I didn't forget anything. And like by working on like the entire body this way, I've been working on everything else right now for a while. So when you go back to the head like this after having it's almost like a fresh look, like you haven't seen it in a long time, and you start to notice a lot more issues with it when you have a break in between. So I like to start with the head, get it to a really good place initially, then move on to everything else, to like move on to the body and to everything else, and then always end up with the head again. So you begin with the head, then do other stuff in the middle, and then end with the head, so that you get a nice, clear, fresh look on it. So everything is pretty smooth at this point. Like this should be a really nice bake. And it's also a great base if I wanna, if I wanna create another character, like to start from this. If I wanna have a completely different face or something like that. It's a good enough face that there's no, like, the features are not like too crazy, too pronounced, it's just an overall like good generic head. So if you're working on something and you want to create, a character with a bunch of different heads, different faces, for example, like customizable faces, then you can just start from this one and then modify it and save it as a one-off, and then keep doing that for like all the different ones, so that they all start with the same kind of style and end up with different features. All right, and we are in a really good spot now. As far as the base body, so this is where we're going to be stopping for, as far as the base body. Now this particular character, as you remember, has a lot more details than that, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next chapter, where we're going to be adding all the details to the character.